Yeah, welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a wonderful Christmas. I myself had a nice quiet day and a lovely conversation with my little sister who lives up in Michigan. But it was just a quiet, rainy day here in the Appalachian Mountains. We had a couple days worth of rain, much better than last year when it was very cold all across the country. So it gave me some time to think about some things and to study some stuff. I've been studying, reading a couple of books. One's called The Sacred Tarot. Cover that some other time. Another one's a book by a guy named Charles Eastman, who was a Sioux Indian who ended up living in both worlds, the red man's world growing up and the white man's world, and became a liaison between the two. And wrote some interesting things. The book's pretty good. Tells what life was like for a Sioux Indian back about 100 years ago or so. But the other interesting thing is what goes on online, social media, especially the Twitterverse or the Xverse, I guess it's now, after Elon Musk's name change. Very symbolic, also, name change. And a lot of interesting threads of discussion. For example, the whole veganism, keto, carnivore diet stuff, blood type diet. I remember reading that book about 20 years ago. Feels like that long ago. I don't even know what blood type I'm at. Somebody asked me that because I was posted a little thing about my story changing from vegan to carnivore 18 months ago and the improvements that I've seen. There's a lot of stories like that. A lot of people seeing a lot of improvement. It's not for everybody. Everybody's got to find their own truth. It's one of my big themes these days. The other thing is all the arguments about COVID and vaccines and jabs and viruses and germ theory versus terrain theory, and some guys who are highly educated by our Western educational system basically keep relying on these studies after study. They just want to see studies done. Study. Laboratory experiments. And that got me thinking a lot about and actually responding to some of it. Just my own study, which is 65 years in this body, and how this is my laboratory. And I have done some interesting things back when I got into life extension back in the early 90s, and doing a lot of things with different stuff. I remember testing myself with beta carotene, taking a lot of beta carotene, and yes, your hands will turn orange. I've proved that. It doesn't hurt you. It didn't hurt me then, hasn't hurt me now, but it does happen. Too much beta carotene, so you got to be careful eating all those carrots. Yeah. Yams and sweet potatoes and all that good orange stuff. But yeah, some of the conversation, I mean, the amount of, the level of the discourse is sad. It's very, very much insulting and just not wanting to even engage in a conversation. One guy invited me on to a Twitter Spaces. I guess they labeled me a vaccine or a virus denier. A lot of labels out there too. Labels divide. George Carlin said that back in 1999. But yeah, it was interesting. This guy, some PhD guy who's a geneticist, wants to cure everybody of their thoughts about the dangers of jabs and the existence or non-existence of viruses and their role in dis-ease of the human body. What's not mentioned in all these things is the idea that we are more than just physical. In fact, the idea that we are spiritual beings first, emotional beings second, mental beings third, and finally physical beings. The physical being a manifestation of the other three. So for example, now how can that be measured, quantified? Well, there's this little thing called the placebo effect. It was used by pharmaceutical companies for decades. Whether or not they still use it, who knows? I haven't looked it up. But my understanding is that when they measured the results of some kind of pharmaceutical drug versus a placebo, the placebo was always the winner. So you can do your own homework on that one. But what I learned years ago following Dr. Bruce Lipton is the idea of the nocebo, the opposite of the placebo. So if the placebo effect is our thoughts can heal us, the nocebo effect is the opposite of that, where our thoughts can cause dis-ease. And we see that in people who are highly depressed. Their train of thought has overtaken their body and manifests itself in some kind of physical ailment or trapped emotions in the body, which energy healers know a lot about. But the so-called scientist, the academically educated, don't take any of this into account. Don't take into account the miracles of stories like Anita Morjani, who was on her deathbed, riddled with cancerous tumors all over her body, had a near-death experience, a little conversation with, I forget if it was her higher self or God or both, but basically realized it wasn't her time, came back into her body, and her body miraculously healed. And the doctors could not explain it except by calling it a miracle. And she wrote a book about it and has been speaking about it ever since. I never saw her live, but I remember following her a lot back in my days, back in the last decade, in the 2000s or 2010s, during my seeking period. She was big into Hay House stuff, I think. But that was just one example. Dr. Eben Alexander was another one, had a near-death experience, medical trained doctor, wrote another book about it. Proof of Heaven, I think it was called. I think Anita's was Dying to Be Me, was the title of the book. And I've read Dr. Eben's book, Dr. Alexander's. I read that book years ago. But these things aren't taken into account by this scientific community, probably because they can't put it into a petri dish. They think that because they can't measure it, that it doesn't exist. Where the flaw in that thinking is that our science, our ability to measure things is very limited. I called it preschool level. What we know about this universe. It's very interesting to see all these conversations in camps that are very diametrically opposed. I do see a lot of people who are former either vegans or had predominantly plant-based diets, moving to carnivore and having phenomenal success. I haven't really come across anybody who has gone the other way. There are some people who have good success with plant-based diets, but they're in the minority from my own investigations, which is very limited, non-scientific. But the one thing I do always come back to is that everybody has to find their own truth. I said this to the guy that invited me onto this Twitter space. Because he was asking me what labs experiments I had done, and I said, just mine, just my own body, all 65 years of it. And I just listen to my body every day, and I see other people posting things like with those exact words, listen to your body. I saw that one today. It was good to see. So who knows where this is all going? All these conversations, arguments, discussions, debates. They need to happen. They're going to continue to happen. All we can do is be the observer, tell our own story. It's really all we can do, I think. I'm not going to go out there and do any experiments or any studies. I got my own path. This is my path right here, sharing my story, sharing my thoughts. And I did, last week I set up to go have blood work done just as a curiosity. Last time I had it done was 18 months ago when I was in very bad shape. Lightheaded, brain fog, skin droopy, the story I told on the road to the carnivore diet. So I'm going to go back, and birthday's coming up in a week from Monday. So I'll go back sometime in the next 10 days, get the blood drawn, and compare it to 18 months ago. And then I'll let you know how it goes. I'll post that little discussion about that and see what it looks like. Yeah, it'd be interesting. But I'm still going to put my faith in what I feel, how good I feel. My body feels good. You know, spent 8 hours on my feet yesterday, deadlifting some toilets and moving some vanities, and body just feels good. Get up this morning, do my exercises, finishing with some dead hang. I've added in another piece to open up my shoulders. I can tell from the repetitive movement of my youth, baseball and especially bowling, that my shoulders got trained with certain movements, and movements that go against that at this age, they can be felt. So with bowling especially, because there was years where I was literally bowling every day. My right shoulder and my left knee is where I can feel it. And so I got an idea from watching a video about opening up the shoulder using a stick, piece of wood, rotating my shoulders back, holding both hands on the wood, and just doing a rotation motion to open it up, bring it back. It feels really good. Hurts when I do that at first, but it feels good after doing it. Do that right after the dead hang. So all these little things, I ran across a guy who has got some great videos. What's it called? Pacific Rim Athletics or something like that. He's got some great videos on YouTube though about body weight exercises and getting the body strong. Highly recommend them. Maybe I'll put a link in the bottom down in the description here. because I learned a lot just by watching a couple of his videos, and about keeping the body limber and strong. And so that's it requires different movements, not the same repetitive movement that we do in the gym. It tends to force the muscles in a lock in a certain movement, and so we want to do body movements, stretching and reaching and bending and twisting the way the body's designed to move. At least that's my path right now. That's what I'm learning and doing, moving the body. And I wanted to share this about the Twitterverse, though. It's quite fascinating. And all these discussions. And there is some, boy, you really can tell. I learned this a long time ago. Ran across this woman I was working with briefly at New York Life back in, this is the mid-90s, when I first went to New York City. And she was a PhD. And she said that she made this comment one time. We were in the bar after work, and she said she would, if she had her way, she would not work with anyone who was not a PhD. Oh, I just laughed. For a kid who dropped out of college, I just looked at her and laughed. And but it shows the arrogance. I had another guy I worked with before that, a couple years before that too, who was a PhD, and there's this certain arrogance, and maybe they're mirroring my own arrogance, which is quite possible, and I do think about that. But yeah, the arrogance and the condescension. Whew. Yeah, of the overeducated. No offense to anybody who's watching this, but it's quite fascinating to observe. Quite fascinating to observe. So I ran across a quote. I'm going to leave you with this. It's getting a little long here. It's from this book that I'm reading. It goes something like this. It says, they talk about reason coming from the masculine energy, the energy of action. Of course, that would be left brain in some schools. And intuition, the feminine energy, right part of the brain. And the quote was something like, I have to look it up, reason without intuition is what they talked about. And it went on to say, I have to look it up. My reading comprehension has always been weak. There's a limiting belief for you. But it goes along the lines of intuition is the great master. Reason is a great slave, but a lousy master, is what I walked away from reading that. And it's just like the mind, the brain, the mind and our thoughts versus what comes from the heart. The heart is the great master. The mind is the great slave. Our intuition is a great master. Follow your intuition. Follow your gut feeling. And don't forget to sing and dance every day and just have fun. Until next time, aho.